that he has to be a father and he has to be a husband and has to deal with also, right? And so there's a total of 7 children that the Prophet ﷺ had. 6 of them come from Khadija, his first wife, as we've talked about her multiple times, radiyallahu anha. And then 1 Ibrahim, who came from Maria al-Qibtiyya, Maria the Coptic. We'll talk about her later on when in a couple of sessions, if you will. So the first child was Qasim. He was the firstborn of the Prophet ﷺ. That's why the Prophet ﷺ has a nickname, what we say in Arabic, kunya, of Abu Qasim. So usually Arabs will nickname themselves from the firstborn. So if your firstborn is Farouk or Ahmed, you'll be Abu Ahmed or Abu Farouk, for example. Even if it's a girl, you are Abu Fatima, for example. Right? And sometimes they get nicknames that has nothing really to do about their family, like Abu Bakr. He doesn't have a son named Bakr. It was just more of a nickname he got from his character, who he was. Bakr means a small calf, if you will. You know, it's like wild and had a lot of energy, if you will. Right. So Qasim was the firstborn of the Prophet ﷺ, and he passed away in his when he was a young child. We have Zainab, radiyallahu anha, the first daughter of the Prophet ﷺ, and she's the eldest. Ruqayya, Kulthum, radiyallahu anha, and then Fatima, radiyallahu anha. All right, and those are the 4 daughters. And then we have Abdullah, and some have this name of Tayyib and Tahir. Either we understand those would be nicknames for the same child, and he passed away when once again when he was a small child also. Okay, and so and Ibrahim, I totally mentioned, he was born to Maria, which understood that she was a concubine of the Prophet, a servant that was given to him from the king of Egypt, Muqawqis. We'll talk about him later on. And he sent her to the Prophet and she became Muslim after leaving her Christian faith. And then the Prophet had 1 child from her, but then he passed away also. So one thing that's really interesting to know that every single child on this slide here passed away during the time of the Prophet except Fatima, radiyallahu anha, and she passed away 6 months after the Prophet passed away, right? So the Prophet had to deal with multiple children passing away in his life. Most of us, we ask Allah to protect us and don't have to see our children pass away in front of us. Usually it's the opposite, right? So imagine if you see 6 of your children pass away. And this is not, when we talk about the boys, we're not talking about they died in like when they're just born or stillborn. We're talking about they're a year and a half, some say 3 years old when they passed away. So that's enough to really play with that child. The child starts speaking, you know, all the little fun things you do with a little toddler. And then see that child, just taken away from you as they pass away. So that's something that we forget to mention. So I wanted to mention here, and I'll go over the wives of the Prophet. Hopefully at the end of when we're done with the Seerah, we'll go over all the different wives and who they were, because it adds up. There's a lot of names there, and so we'll cover that inshallah ta'ala. All right, let me see. It's gonna work right now. This one. All right. One thing I also wanted to mention, let me just minimize this, is a miracle of the Prophet we didn't really talk about, and is seldom talked about, and that is the splitting of the moon. One thing the Quraysh, as people did with all their previous prophets, always kind of demanding some type of proof of their prophethood and do something spectacular to prove that you're not just a regular person. And so even though the Quraysh knew that the Prophet ﷺ was not a regular person, his Arabic, his poetry, the words of the Quran was different than what they heard, and they knew that was something that was special, but they still asked for the Prophet ﷺ to, if you can do something special, why don't you split the moon? Look at the big moon there. If you're so powerful, God talks to you, if you could do so. And so during the time of Prophet, he actually put up his hand up, and he moved his hand on one side, and the moon split open, and then he put it back, and the moon came back together. Now that's super spectacular. That's probably would be the biggest miracle of any prophet that we have seen so far, from Ibrahim alayhi salam walking out of the fire, and Musa alayhi salam, walking through the sea. That's pretty spectacular. And so here we have some narrations in Sahih Muslim, where it's narrated that during the lifetime of the Prophet of the Allah's Messenger, the moon was split in 2 parts, and the Prophet said, "Bear witness to this, like bear witness that you are seeing this." right? And so it's also, if you want a little bit more deeper in this, if you really want to go and, you could Google around online, and you can see there's people going on different views of scientifically, does it show that the moon has been split? Obviously, if you split something in half, you put it back together, you would see some type of rift. That's obviously a animation or some type of, picture that was just drawn like that. The moon really doesn't look like that. That you'll see some type of, type of rift or some type of crevice going down the middle of the moon or somewhere, if you will. And there's a lot of scientists and astronomers that actually show that there is a cut around the moon, whether, of course, we will believe it from this hadith here, that shows us some type of, putting back together two parts, if you will, like a mountain range or some type of valley. So you can look at that. There's a lot of pictures there. I didn't have enough time to verify these studies, and some is actually from astronomers. Like people have degrees in astronomy, and they're not just some online person that just put up pictures there. And there's other people that kind of reject this, of course, non-Muslims usually, and say that this was wasn't done. And it's interesting. There is narrations. I mentioned that other people in part of the world did see this, which would make sense. Right? If you split the moon, anyone in that area that's nighttime, would see that in a certain areas. So there's some narration on that.
Yes, I remember Sheikh Uthman ibn Farooq, like there's actually a document that a Hindu king in India saw this.
Yes.
And then so there is proof that this obviously happened outside of the Quran and stuff.
Right.
Also like NASA, they try to come up with the theory because they found cracks on the surface of the moon.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like they try to explain this by saying that something crashed into the moon, like some giant meteor or something crashed into the moon or a planet maybe.
Yeah.
And then the problem is there's no evidence for this theory.
Yeah,
it's just a theory. They literally have no evidence to back that up.
Yeah, so this is an interesting. This I just wanted to note that we didn't get to go over it.
But I mean, if Allah has the power, which we know He has, to split the moon, He also can put it back together without any evidence or any, like you say, a crack or something.
That's true.
It's the same. Last week we talked about the Masjid al-Aqsa, right?
Mm-hmm,
Was it there? Was it not there? Well, maybe it was there.
Yeah.
Maybe it was there exactly the way it is now. Maybe even the ceiling fans were working.
Yeah.
Who knows? If it was there for half an hour, whatever the time took to do the prayer at the door, and then
that's true.
And then it's gone.
Yeah, of course. That's very true. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's power. We look at
No, we don't need that. What I'm trying to say.
Yes.
We don't need to see those cracks.
Right, exactly,
Because it's happened, and if the power is there to suddenly split it, you can put it together without a crack.
Exactly, that's a good point.
You figure out to put it back together
right.
so you don't see it was split.
Yeah.
Like a car accident, you can fix it nowadays and you don't see the car.
That's right. Brother John brings up a good point. So even though if we, as us as Muslims, if we wouldn't even see a rift or a crack or some type of mountain range or a valley now, it doesn't matter. It will still be our faith, a part of us. Because this hadith here, this is from Sahih Muslim. That's the reason why I put this narrations, because the narrations of the highest caliber of hadith authentication. So it was just something to put there. Obviously, we know that the Quraysh didn't really believe in it. They still say that this is sorcery, this is magic that you did in front of our eyes. And that's why miracles a lot of times didn't really work with people. They're just still going to be, as you say, deaf, dumb, and blind, as they say. So.
Sometimes with the snakes, right? Prophet Musa, when he stopped, became ate the other magicians' staffs.
So the other magicians knew it because they understand that. They know how to make a fake snake or, illusion. And also I was going to put like the tribe of Thamud, right? They asked for a camel to come from the side of a mountain. And they actually saw that happen in front of their eyes. I don't know about me and you. I would fall over if I would see something like that. And they still didn't believe, and that's pretty significant to have a real animal come out of a rock. So anyhow. Just recapping on this, we talked about the first pledge of Aqaba within the 12th year, how the Prophet ﷺ, first year before this, he had 7 people that embraced Islam. He had a, let me see, I'm gonna go back here, what I have on my slide here. Yeah, there you go. He had 5 people that embraced Islam before that, and then 7 of them, then he had 7 new people that came this year. Right, and they took this pledge. We took the pledge of the women. We said there's no fighting of that. And then this is kind of where we didn't really cover this slide last week. We kind of went really quick. We're talking about the second pledge of Aqaba, where in the 13th year, 75 people from Yathrib. You have to understand, when this Khazraj tribe and Aus tribe come to Hajj, there's a massive amount of them. There's a lot of them. But only 75 of them are the ones that accepted Islam. So they snuck away and met with the Prophet ﷺ in this place called Aqaba in the valley of Mina. And so the rest of the tribe didn't even know that this was going on. They weren't part of this deal. They didn't know that this conversion was going on, right? And so it was only these 75. I said there was 2 women there, and this was a point of the agreement, of course, to become Muslim, and to listen and obey to the Prophet ﷺ and defend the Prophet ﷺ. Now there's war that agreements here that you will put your life out there and your blood and and yourself to defend the Prophet ﷺ, right? And then the Prophet said that, then they said that, what in return are we going to get from this? And the Prophet said that you'll get Jannah, and they were ecstatic with that. They accepted that. And one thing is to add on this is that Abbas, the uncle of the Prophet ﷺ, he's the one that walks with the Prophet ﷺ up to this tribe here, and he starts off the conversation and said, hey, and he wasn't even Muslim at that time. He said, you are going to take my nephew to go to live somewhere else, and he's dear to us. Make sure, if you're going to say you're going to defend him, make sure you defend him. If you're not, then leave right now, right? Even though he wasn't Muslim, the family ties were so strong, right? And they said, no, we are going to defend him. We'll put ourselves just how we do. We defend him as we defend our own selves. And then they invited the Prophet ﷺ to migrate to there, if you will. So they understood that these actions will cause their life, right? Cause risks to their life and their land. I want you to understand this point, because what is the main reason why they accepted the Prophet? What was the main motivation factor? It was that battle of PBUH we talked about, right? That a lot of their leaders got killed, and there was a lot of civil war and so forth. They are again accepting the Prophet with the understanding that this is going to happen again, probably, most likely. Where our life is going to be probably on the line again. There's probably going to be some wars, but they understand that this is a little bit different than what they previously been going on, right? And that's significant, because the Prophet said that, you know what, I'm going to be your leader, but there'll be no wars ever again. You don't have to fight if you don't want to. You guys have been doing that for so many years, but that wasn't what's said, and they still agreed to it. So that's something just to understand there, that sometimes they understand their life, they'll have to be back in this war cycle again, but this was a little bit different, if you will. They understood that the breaking the treaties with the Jewish tribes, now that they accept a prophet, and know that the Jews are not going to like it, they understood that's going to cause animosity with them, right? But they accepted that once again. You know what I mean? The Jews and those tribes around there might cause us issues with that, but they went ahead and did that. The Prophet ﷺ, after they made sure that was clear, he assigned 12 people now to go back to Yathrib, or be later on Medina, and to spread Islam as much as possible, right? The Dawah team, if you will, and make sure people are ready for this message and they accept it. And so they're already calling people Islam, just days after they become Muslim. The Quraysh finds out about this meeting. Now you think obviously something like can't be that hush-hush, right? You're meeting at nighttime in a certain area, people are going to see some lights on, something's going to go on. Some people have said that Shaitan was there and he yelled out in a voice, however that was, that these people are meeting and this is going on, and people heard that call, right? And they told the leaders, and the Quraysh leaders came, and they came up to the Khazraj tribe, Khazraj and Aus, both of them, said, did you guys have a meeting last night? And you're meeting with the Prophet ﷺ. Remember, it was only 75 of them. It wasn't all the people that were there. So the 75 that were there, when the leaders of the Quraysh came, they just stood quiet, as if they didn't know what's going on. And Abdullah ibn Ubay, he's one of their main leaders, got up and said, what are you talking about? There was no meeting that happened. I was with the people all night, right? And then he says that if they will not do something unless they got my permission. Okay. You guys will know a little bit about Abdullah ibn Ubay. He becomes the leader of the munafiqun, the hypocrites later on, okay? And so he's saying that, no, I know my own people, they wouldn't have done this. Of course, the 75 Muslims that are there, they stay quiet, they're not lying, they don't say anything. And the Quraysh said, okay, we'll take your word for it, but I think something went on, right? They still have a hinge, if you will. I want you to understand that, here, Abdullah ibn Ubay, he's taking that form of leadership that, these are my people, they can't do nothing without my command. So imagine how he's going to feel when the Prophet, comes into Medina, right? Nobody likes someone that comes in and they're the new CEO. It's like when some company buys your company, right? And now you have new, management. You now have no relationship with that person. You're trying to move up in the company, and now someone else is going to take your spot, et cetera. That's going to cause some riffraff and so forth, right? So this is not just a company. This is a tribe with much more deeper relationships. Right? And so just give a little quicker review before we go into the migration is where we're at here. We have, of course, the 13 years in Mecca. we have the start of the revelation, we have the private preaching, right? We have, like, we said there is where we have this meeting in the house of Dar Arqam, right? They were studying there. It was just word of mouth. Then the opening preaching, and once that opening preaching comes, there comes persecution. And that's why some Muslims had to go to Abyssinia. We talked about that. We have the conversion of Umar and Hamza in the 6th year. Muslims got a little bit more clout. And that led to what? The boycott, right? Because now the Muslim Quraysh know that they can't be too physical with them. They have to do something else. So they go through economic sanctions, if you will. Okay. And then after that, you have the death of Abu Talib and Khadija, the visit to Ta'if, where the Prophet was humiliated. The Isra is around there also. I think it's kind of hard to put everything and right in there. There's not really much space. And then the year 11 is the marriage of Aisha, radiallahu anha. Before that, the year 10 is the marriage of Sauda, radiallahu anha. I didn't get to put that there. 6 people of Yathrib become Muslim, and that becomes 12, and then becomes 75. Okay, so it just takes a while sometimes. You have to have patience when you're spreading Islam. If people not just going to accept the message, you keep on working on them, inshallah ta'ala will happen. So this is kind of like the main events that happen in Mecca as we are proceeding now to what we call the migration. The Prophet ﷺ gives the green light to the Muslims that, hey, this tribe has offered to take us in. Go ahead and start migrating Yathrib. Right? Everyone don't do it all at once, because the Quraysh are going to see that, and they're not going to like it. Right? So just go stealthily as much as possible. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 families every now and then. Just go out and make your migration there. Imagine how much iman and faith that you're sitting in a land that you lived in and you've been living there for so long. Well, this year, like Garden Grove, for example, Westminster, Anaheim, and all of a sudden, Dr. Siddiqui said, guys, we're all going to move up to Stockton, Northern California. You're like, what's Northern California? Why would I want to go there for? Is there companies there? Am I going to get a job there? We're going. Okay. So they just packed up and went. They didn't really ask, what's my livelihood? How much money I could take? How much stuff I could take? You just go. There's no U-Hauls, no nothing. Just take as much as you can and go. Sometimes we overlook that. That's extremely hard. Right now, to move to another city just because you find a job somewhere else is hard to move your whole family. There's people taking up all their stuff that they lived there for so long. Really put your mind in this mentality, this predicament, and then leaving. That's an immense amount of iman in the Prophet ﷺ and belief in what he's saying, and that Allah will take care of you. Right? Some of the stories that we have is Abu Salama, who he left with his wife Salama and their son, and they were going. They're going to go to, obviously going to go to Medina or Yathrib. And so some of the Meccans, Quraysh, stopped them. They knew that they were leaving, they caught them. And so he said, you know what, Abu Salama wasn't really from the Quraysh's tribe. So they said, we don't care about you, but his wife was. And so they said, so how about the son? The son has 50-50, right? The lineage goes both ways. So they said, we're going to take your wife and your son. They cannot leave. So this is a husband now being separated from his son and his wife, right? And so here that his son and his wife gets detained, and he goes to Yathrib. Right? He can't go back now. They're going to get either injured or something like that. So he has to leave. And after that, she has to stay back. It wouldn't be until a whole year later she gets to reunite with her husband back in Yathrib. And now Abu Salama gets to see both his wife and his son. All for Islam. There's no financial benefit. No one's going to pay you to do this. Within 2 months, you have places within Mecca are just empty now. Muslim families are leaving now. And of course, that's going to be a big, going to show a big factor into what's actually happening. The Quraysh don't like that. They see that, and they're going to start taking some action. The Prophet ﷺ, Abu Bakr and Ali was one of the last ones to leave. The Prophet ﷺ didn't say, you know what, I'm just going to take off, you guys follow me. He really wanted to make sure everyone left and he saw them leave as safely as possible. And then when Allah SWT gave him that green light to go, then he went. Okay, so Abu Bakr stayed back because he was hoping to go with the Prophet ﷺ. So he's like, I'm not going to leave, I want to go with the Prophet ﷺ. So if I do that, that'll be great. It'll be a great honor to be there. Okay, Ali radiallahu anhu is in the household of the Prophet ﷺ, and also some of his family members are also still there, and they'll come up later on. So the last ones to leave. Now the Quraysh, obviously, they all know this is happening. They see a Muslim leave. What type of plot are they going to come up with? So the leaders of the Quraysh met, and they decided that how they're going to end this migration and this call to Islam. What are the final steps? It's getting really, really bad. Quarters of the city are missing now because people are leaving. And so they had this meeting in Dar Nadwa, this town hall meeting that they have for all the leaders. It's mentioned that Iblis went there in the disguise of an elder from one of the tribes to try to find out what are they saying so they could influence them to basically try to kill the Prophet ﷺ, okay? And so they discussed, how about we imprison him? Just chain him up, put him down, nobody could talk to him, house arrest, etc. But they said, his followers would just increase more love for him. And then what will happen? They'll end up probably breaking into that house, taking him out. Abu Jahl suggested to assassinate him. That would be the best thing. If you just kill him off, that's it. There's no more preaching. There's no more Quran that's coming down. That would be the best thing. Okay. And so they said, let's go with that option, which is a crazy option for a tribe because they're all family, a bunch of nephews and, they're a bunch of, cousins that are all with each other pretty much. Cousins and uncles pretty much. Right. And so deciding to kill someone from your own family is pretty crazy. That no tribe really does that, but this is the only option they have left. So they said, how could they even do that, and how would other tribes view that? So they decided, we'll have all the different clans within the umbrella of Quraysh. Let all 11 of them submit one person. They all go in, and they end up killing the Prophet ﷺ all at one time. So the blood money and the blood is on 11 people in all the clans, so it doesn't fall on one of them. So then they all decided, yes, we'll go with this, if you will. Well, they'll do that. Once that they decided on to do that, Jibreel alayhi salam goes to the Prophet ﷺ, tells him this is the plot, and you need to move now. Okay. So all of them decided to go around the Prophet ﷺ and go around his house and try to surround him to try to fulfill this assassination. It's mentioned here in the Quran in Surah Anfal, chapter number 8, where Allah SWT says, I remember, O Muhammad, when those who disbelieve plotted against you to restrain you or kill you or evict you from Mecca, but they plan, but Allah plans, and Allah is the best of makirin, the best of the planners, right? And so Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives a plan to the Prophet ﷺ. The Prophet ﷺ goes and visits Abu Bakr radiallahu anh during the daytime. During the daytime, people didn't used to move around too much around Dhuhr time. It's a little too hot. People used to take a rest and sleep. And so the Prophet ﷺ comes into Abu Bakr's house. Everyone's a little surprised. Why is he here at this time? The Prophet ﷺ tells Abu Bakr, everyone in the house, tell him to leave. This is a secret, meaning I only need to talk to you. Even though he trusted people in the house, he wants to make sure it's as private as possible. And then he tells them that this is what's going to happen. We're going to leave tonight, and we need a plan. Abu Bakr radiallahu anh, for 4 months was already preparing a camel in terms of water and fattening it up to get ready for this journey, because he knew that's going to take a while. He already knew that this is something he had to prepare for. What happens at night? The assassins, these 11 people, go around the house of the Prophet ﷺ, waiting for him to go. Ali radiallahu anh is in his house. The Prophet ﷺ told Ali, you sleep in my bed with the covers over you, as if I'm the one sleeping in that bed. And so, remember, they don't have like doors that we have today. It's like a curtain and drape. You can kind of almost like a peeping Tom. You can kind of just look in and you kind of see what's going on in there. And so they all looked in there and they saw the Prophet was still sleeping in the bed. They didn't literally know that was Ali radiallahu anh. The Prophet sneaks out of the house, and this is a verse from Surah Yasin, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that, he puts a barrier in front of them and a barrier behind them, and then la yubsiru, and they don't see. And so he walks out, he recites that ayah, and takes dirt and puts it on their heads, kind of like a way of defaming them, and humiliating them, and puts the dirt on their heads and walks out, even though he's right in front of them. So it's a miracle from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Okay. They're all waiting for so long throughout the night. And they finally get a word, the Prophet already left. They bust open to the house, they go in there, they take off the blanket, and guess who's there? Ali radiallahu anh. That's a big sacrifice for Ali to take that role, because he could get killed. They could just come with a sword and then find out. But lucky that, alhamdulillah, they pulled out the blanket, they saw him, but they still beat him up. Tell him where the Prophet ﷺ is, threatening to torture him. They still tortured him. Of course, he didn't give up the word of where he was. Alhamdulillah, he stayed quiet. Alhamdulillah, right? And didn't tell him what happened. The Prophet ﷺ goes out with Abu Bakr. They head south to this cave of Thawr, or the cave of Thawr, which is 5 miles due south. I don't know if any of you guys have ever been there. Now they don't let people go up, at least for the last 2 years I've been there. They don't let people go up in there anymore, but you just stop. And they're doing a lot of renovations. They're making it like more of a festive thing. There's like more of a shopping things going on and so forth. And there are a little bit more maps and museums of kind of what's kind of going on. Not museum, but displays of what the cave and how it looked like and so forth. And so the Prophet goes down 5 miles south. That's walking, right, in the middle of the night, right? That's to go and head southwards. We all know Medina is where? North. It's like if you want to go to, Sacramento, you take the 5 north, right? So they went south instead, opposite direction, thinking that the Quraysh will know that they'll head south. So if we could just go south and shut off all the roads that way, then we could end up finding him. So the Prophet ﷺ obviously has to do something else. So they go south to this cave of Thawr, stay there for about 3 days. This is actually the cave up here. It's a small picture though, which is more on the top of the mountain itself, where you have to climb up and then you go down into the cave. It's kind of hard to tell by this picture here. And so if somebody would stand, they could look down into the cave and they could see someone there. Okay, and so they went out there. They stood there for about 3 days. They had it all planned out, where they had the son of Abu Bakr radiallahu anh would come with camels and pretend that he's taking the sheep out in the desert to go feed and water them, etc. But actually, he would go deliver food to them. And also, what happens is that the sheep, when they're walking, they would also clear up any footprints that lead up to that area there, so it's kind of smart. And so they always make sure that they'll have stuff that they need there. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks about this incident here in Surah Tawbah, where the Quraysh knew that he wasn't north, he had to go somewhere else. They went down south, they had somebody that was able to track the footprints and track where the Prophet ﷺ, and these people were really good in terms of knowing the camel dung and where the camel went and everything, of tracing out where people went. And they said, he's somewhere in this mountain there. So the leaders of the Quraysh went to this mountain, they walked over, and they're right almost at the opening of the cave, where they will look down, as it mentioned in the books, that they will look and they'll see the Prophet ﷺ and Abu Bakr. The cave is much different than Cave Hira, where the Prophet ﷺ got revelation. It's a much smaller area. So it's not like you go really deep inside. If you look down, you'll see people there. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions in Surah Tawbah here, where he says, if you do not aid the Prophet ﷺ, talking to the Quraysh, Allah has already aided him when those who disbelieved have driven him out of Mecca, as one of the two, when they were in the cave, said to his companion, one of the two, meaning Abu Bakr and the Prophet ﷺ. Okay? And Abu Bakr said, how about if they look and they see us? So then the Prophet ﷺ answers, do not grieve, inna Allaha ma'ana. Indeed, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is with us. Like, why are you worrying for? The Prophet ﷺ is on just calm, cool, and collective. Like, Allah's with us. Like, don't worry. All right, we'll be okay, right? You have to take, you have to take the, means of protecting yourself, but Allah is with us. And Allah sent down his tranquility upon him and supported him with angels you do not see, and made the word of those who disbelieve the lowest, and the word of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala the highest. Allah is exalted in the might and wise. So they stayed there. They didn't get to see them. There's that story about the spider and the spider web. I think a lot of us knew that when small kids, right? That is much more authentic than there is a story about like a bird and the eggs, like a dove. That is not as authentic. That's a little bit more problematic.
Even I heard a chef from Saudi Arabia actually say that this was that spider story was actually like fabricated. It was like very weak at best. And
I don't know about fabricated though. I heard
it was like very weak at best. So I heard it's not reliable. That was another one of those stories that we heard as children, and then it turned out to be like.
I know the bird one is with the eggs and like the doves right there. How can a dove be there in a nest and so forth? But the one with the spider, I believe in Sahih Muslim. I need to go. I
heard it was like very weak. So.
Let me go back. I just went over this right before class. I didn't know the the reference to it.
I can try to send that video.
Yeah. So anyhow, so they stay there. The Quraysh put a price of 100 camels, capturing one of them. That's a lot of money. That's in the that's just a lot of camels, a lot of more money to do this. Obviously, they wanted to make sure that this was done. the Prophet ﷺ, or Abu Bakr arranges this person named Abdullah ibn Urayqit, who has not embraced Islam. He wasn't a Muslim, but he just knew, he was like the GPS of the deserts, you know what I mean? He was like the Google Maps. So he knew the routes of where to go, okay? Other than the normal routes somebody would take to go to Medina. He knew the alternate routes, even though it might be a little bit more dangerous, but where to go so the Quraysh wouldn't know that you're on this road, okay? So like taking the surface streets instead of taking the freeway, right? So how you can go around when people wouldn't find you? Which is a desert, so it's much more dangerous because you can't go too far without finding a certain well on the way to make sure you have water. You can't just go out in the desert in 100 degrees or 120 degrees weather and make sure you're going to be safe. So they hired him, and it's mentioned that there were three of them: Abu Bakr, the Prophet ﷺ, and Abdullah. Some said there was another person, Amr ibn Furayha. He was one of the servants of Abu Bakr that was with them. So either there were three or four of them, and they went up and now journeying to go up to Medina. There is a map here. This may be not super clear. Some people that this is the Hijra route that the Prophet ﷺ made. So this line here, like I said, it's not super clear, is how the Prophet ﷺ went down south and then went all the way up to finally when they went to Medina. There's a dashed line here showing where the normal route of the Quraysh would go, usually when they would go up to Medina. And there's Jeddah right here. Oh, sorry. Let me go back there. There's Jeddah over here. It's saying that there's a freeway that the Saudis built to go to Medina. They call it the Hijra route because they actually went to try to mimic where the Prophet ﷺ would go because actually it was quicker and faster. And so they actually took that as a route. So it's actually called the Hijra freeway or something. I forgot the exact name of it, if you will. So people actually take that route there.
Actually, that was kind of something I wanted to ask earlier. So the reason that even in the north that the route kind of deviates from where the normal the other Hijra route is because it's faster? Or faster,
and also that most people were on this route, so then maybe they have to hide, right?
Oh, there's still like Quraysh in so far north.
Yeah, or other tribes. Because they all heard about the prize money.
Oh.
And so they knew that, hey, this is the word from the Quraysh. They said if somebody captures them, brings it back to us, you're going to get 100 camels. Yeah, so you don't care if you're not from the Quraysh, that you get 100 camels.
I was always under the impression that as soon as they were out,
they're free.
They were like
the jurisdiction's over.
Yeah.
Right.
Then, can I see on the slide before this? I had another question actually, if you don't mind. Is on the second point here is what is that?
So this is when Abu Bakr, some people stopped him. And they didn't know the Prophet ﷺ because they're not from Quraysh and they maybe didn't get the word yet. So they said, who is this person with you?
But they knew Abu Bakr though?
They knew Abu Bakr because he was well known in his lineage and so forth of like knowing other tribes. So he's kind of known. He's like the historian, one of the big historians of Mecca. And so just out of asking, and they knew that he was more of the leader, I guess. And so they asked, who is this person? And he said, this is my guide, meaning that my guide in life. But then the people understood, your guide on this trip, right? Called Tawriya in Arabic. It means like, use one word that has two different meanings. And that's what he would do. There's another incident that's mentioned when somebody asked him, what tribe are you from? Are you from Quraysh or not? So the Prophet said, Ana min ma, I'm from water. And there's a tribe called Ma. So they thought, you're from this tribe. I'm like, okay, no. But the Prophet really saying that Allah made everything from water. So I'm from water. That's what he meant to say that from. And then the tribe thought, the person thought, you're from this Ma tribe. So therefore, okay, you're not the person we're looking for. So you might call that a white lie. We want to attribute that to the Prophet ﷺ, but it wasn't. Obviously, he had the meaning. He had an understanding of that, if you will. So So that's the story. That's there, if you will. But if we go back to this, so 280 miles. They said that most camels at that time will travel around 50 miles in a 3-day period. Okay, so if you do that math there, right? And so you go there. What's the math? How much 50 is in 280? Yep, on. How good are you guys in math? So you have like about 9, right? So the 9. No, is it 2, 3, 4, 5? About 5. Then you times it by 3. So you're talking about almost like a 2-week period to travel. That's usually what they will take to go up to Medina, right? So 2 weeks in the desert. How much provisions do you have? Trying to, think about your life that somebody's going to try to get us. It's a rough I'm not saying exactly that was the exact amount of days, but it'll be something around there, if you will, that the Prophet will have to travel. Okay. There's a story of Suraqah ibn Malik, kind of going back what Amir was mentioning. So Suraqah ibn Malik wasn't from the tribe of the Quraysh, but he heard about this bounty, about if you find the Prophet and Abu Bakr, you get this reward. And so some people told Suraqah, as he was a leader of his tribe, that we saw these 3 people out there in the desert walking. And then he said, you know what, there's some people I sent. He knew that he didn't know who the people were, but he wanted the money. So he said, oh, don't want to leave them. And then he went after them. And it's mentioned that every time he come closer to the Prophet ﷺ and Abu Bakr, his horse will stumble and it will stop, and he flew off his horse, which he never does. People know their horses very well, so almost like their best friend almost, right? And so they said, like, what the heck is going on? So he tried to got on his horse again. He went after the Prophet ﷺ. The horse stopped. He flew off again. So he knew that something was going on here, something that's divine, if you will. And so they do a lot of superstition. So they have these arrows that he pulled out and kind of threw it on the ground to tell him what should they do. And he took it and what he understood from it, it was telling him not to go for it. I mean, this is a pagan ritual, but nonetheless. And so he said, but he wants money. So he went after the Prophet ﷺ. He got close to him. And then he realized that this person was something that's divine in nature. This wasn't a regular person. He's seeing all these signs. And he starts believing in the Prophet ﷺ. They have a conversation with him and Abu Bakr. And then the Prophet ﷺ tells him something very, very interesting. He said, Suraqah, why are you trying to get us and try to capture us when I could see the bracelets of Kisra around your wrists? Who's Kisra? Kisra was a leader of the Persian Empire. So he's basically saying that we're going to conquer Persia, which is like crazy. It's like saying like, I don't know, Cuba is going to take over Russia one of these days. Nobody would think that. How can Cuba so small, right? Muslims are very small, and Russia is such a big empire. You know what I mean? That's what the Persian Empire was. And so he's saying, I could see the bracelets of the leaders of Persia around your bracelet on your arm. You're going to have that. Later on, we won't get this in this class. During the time of Umar, the Muslims conquer Persia. And guess what? The bracelets of the leader falls on, and Umar gives it to, one of the leaders they give it to Suraqah. He gets he puts it on, but he has to give it back because this goes in the Muslims' treasury, though. But he gets to see that, he gets to be that moment. So the Prophet was foreseeing that you're going to be one of the leaders, you're going to be a Muslim. And so he doesn't take them in. He believes in the Prophet ﷺ. He goes back, doesn't tell him a word of what he saw, and then he lets them go, subhanAllah. But this was obviously very scary because he almost got caught. We have the story of Ma'bad. This is probably a very person, you should know this person's name. She's an old lady, but we have in the history of hadith literature, she has the most descriptive hadith on the Prophet ﷺ, how he looked. Okay, if you ever read, I should have probably put it in one of the slides here. It's very long, but she narrates how the Prophet ﷺ's hair, his skin, his shoulder blades, everything that you can really think about the Prophet ﷺ, she narrates of who this person was. The Prophet ﷺ, as he's going up to Medina, going up to Yathrib, he stops and sees her, and what this Ma'bad would do, she was an old lady, so she would leave a mat outside of her house, and with water and stuff like this for any travelers who would come, kind of like a nice thing to do. And so the Prophet and Abu Bakr and the crew that was with them stopped there, and she said, you know what, I'm so sorry, but I have no milk for you to drink. I have nothing. My goat here is pretty much half dead. It's all dried up. And so the Prophet tells her, bring that goat to me. The Prophet puts his hand under the udder and milk just rushes out. And she's like, and she doesn't know who the Prophet is at all. She doesn't know who that person is. And she's understanding, what the heck is going on? Obviously, all this milk comes, she drinks from it, everyone drinks from it, and then they leave. And now later on, she finds out who this person was. That's why she narrates this story, because she was in so awe of who this person was that she makes sure she knew all his descriptions very well, right? And so that was the story of Ma'bad and her description of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Okay. We went over this a bit here. The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, as they're going up, alhamdulillah, within a 2-week span, they don't get caught, they don't get captured, they have some close incidents that we just mentioned here, and they finally arrived on the outskirts, I would say, of Medina, this place called Kuba. Okay, and that is the first area that they'll come into. The people of Medina at that time knew that the Prophet was coming, so they'll come out every morning and look out for him. And when they don't see him, they go back. obviously the sun gets quite hot during the middle of the day, and so let us go back. So the Prophet came, when we came to Medina, there was a group that was there, and the Prophet stopped there. You could still say that's part of Yathrib, as part of Medina. I like to call it the outskirts of Medina. And he stops there. He spends there for about 4 days, or 3 or 4 days, right? And he builds the first masjid ever outside masjid, the Kaaba, if you will, if you want to consider that a masjid at that time. The first masjid of Islam, and that is Masjid Quba, which is that white structure. If you ever take an Umrah trip or a Hajj trip, you probably will go to Masjid Quba as part of usually the package. They'll do some visiting there. And so obviously it didn't look like that back in those days. Obviously it's much built up now. So the Prophet ﷺ, they built a small masjid there, right? Always the first place he goes, he builds a masjid, right? To have a center there for Muslims to pray and so forth. And so he stays there, which is around 7.5 miles away from where Masjid Nabawi is, before he goes down to, we call it downtown Medina. And he goes there, spends a couple of days there, and then builds a masjid, and he leaves on a Friday to go to the main Medina, if you will, okay? And he goes there, he left with the tribe of Bani Najjar. This is going back to his mom's relatives, okay? She has relatives from Yathrib, so he's actually connecting there with them. And he stops in this valley of Bani Salim and has the first Jummah prayer. The Prophet never actually prayed Jummah before, because there was no Jummah prayer in the Kaaba in Mecca at all. So the first time he ever prayed Jummah before. This is like a nice quiz question you could tell your family and see if they could get this, right? And most people want to know this, right? So the Prophet prays first Jummah prayer, first khutbah that he does, gathers people around, does the Jummah prayer, and then heads into Medina itself, right? There you have, the girls in Medina, small girls come up, they're singing, they're chanting. The men of the Khazraj and Ansar dress up in their armor as they're waiting for the Prophet ﷺ. They embrace him. They walk in like an entourage with him into Medina. This is quite different. The Prophet ﷺ never got this respect ever in his life. All in Mecca. No one ever welcomed him. Thank you for spreading Islam. This is something that he's not used to. They're having almost a parade for him, that he's coming into a city and they're welcome. He's a new leader, right? How Allah could change things from night and day in a matter of time. You just have to wait 13 years, right? And you're people oh my God, 13 years, I can't wait for that long, right? But this is how, this is dunya. You have to have that sabr to go through whatever issues you're going through in your life and know that Allah is going to bring you victory. And Allah knows that time. If that's 13 years for you, or that might be 3 years for another person, right? But as long as you have that iman, you'll see that victory that has happened time over time again, right? We see that multiple times, especially with the prophet stories in the Quran, okay? And so they welcome him in, alhamdulillah. He comes in there, he's on his camel qaswa, and he comes into there, and the camel's going in. Everyone's trying to tell the Prophet, come and stay with me. And of course, why wouldn't you want a prophet to stay at your house? So he doesn't have a house, right? There's no hotels. So everyone wants him to stay. And he says, you know what? I'm on this guided camel. When it stops, it stops. Allah is controlling it. And so it comes to an area, it sits down, then it gets back up, walks forward, makes a U-turn, and comes right back to that same area. And the Prophet said, this is where the masjid is going to be at. We'll build a masjid right here before his own house. So the masjid first. And he stays with this person named Abu Ayyub Ansari, he stays with him. So think about the mentality that the masjid is more important than my own house, right? And it needs a center for the Muslims to be there. It's good to know that these two terms here, most of us are familiar with this. You have the Ansar, it means the Muslims of Medina, right? The Prophet will give them that name, he called them by that name. And the Muslims that were Mecca, the Muhajirun, right? They made hijrah. So the Muhajirun means someone that made hijrah, right? Made migration. That's the name he gave them. So there's nothing wrong of making names of groups within the Muslims to identify them and understand who they are. And you'll see even in war, in the battles, he will separate them. The Ansar is fighting on this side, and the Muhajirun is fighting on that side, because they know each other a lot more. So it's better if they're going to, life and death, you want to be with somebody you could, you see eye to eye with and you know what they're going to do. And then someone brand new is going to be there on the front line of a battle, and you're not sure what they're going to do. You never worked on a project with them before, right? So the Prophet with his wisdom, would make sure that they separated and who would work together. It doesn't mean they're different or their iman is different or etc., right? But it's something that he would use those terms, if you will. We see these terms in and the Quran and Hadith. Every Ansari wanted the Prophet to stay with them. The chiefs of the city dressed up and rode with them into the city. Okay, and this is obviously that's the Masjid Nabawi, which it didn't look. I mean, obviously didn't look like that during the time of the Prophet ﷺ. I mentioned some of this already. A few days later, after the Prophet stayed, then his family finally came. His wife Sauda, we mentioned that he married her. His two daughters, Fatima and Kulthum, came. Zainab, one of his eldest daughters, will come later. Okay, so imagine your own daughter was not able to come because of situations that there was going on in Mecca. They weren't able to leave. Ayman, which is that was like a servant in the Prophet's house, was there. Abdullah, the son of Abu Bakr, came, and Aisha will come later on. Okay, and all come into the Prophet's house, and he lived right next to the masjid there. And that put there goes Zainab was not able to make it. How is life in Medina? Life in Medina, the Prophet stayed there for 10 years before he passed away. He was in Mecca for 13 years. So 10 years in Medina are broken up, the scholars of Seerah, they break it up into different divisions. So they talk about the first stage is up to the 6th year, which is a lot of discord and fighting. Imagine if you're new to an area, people are not going to like you. Okay, some people are going to have envy you, jealousy. You're the new kid on the block, right? They're going to want to try to take you down. So you see the Prophet has to deal with a lot of war during this time. We'll go over the battles. Until up to the 6th year, the Treaty of Hudaybiyah, that is what the scholars of Seerah call this the second stage, where there happens a truce with the Quraysh. The Quraysh are not able to fight them anymore, at least for a 10-year period, right? And the Prophet was able to send letters out to all the different countries, all the different rulers, and invite them to Islam. And then we have the last year is the spread of Islam. We see a lot of tribes start coming into Islam, and then the Prophet passes away, more in the 10th year, or the 11th year, if you will, around that time. So these are the 3 stages here. The Sahaba, the companions of the Prophet ﷺ, were broken up in main 2 groups, as I mentioned earlier, right? We have the Muhajirun, homeless, jobless, okay? They're all coming from Mecca. They're coming in, right? They're Muslim brothers, obviously, of Ansar, but they have no place to work and no place to, stay. So the Prophet ﷺ does this pact of brotherhood, where anyone from Mecca that comes, he assigns them to some Muslim in Medina. I said, this is now your brother. You actually eat their food, you live in their house, and you inherit from them. As your blood brother comes. Later on, the verses of inheritance will be sent down, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says they do not inherit because they're not true brothers. But this is how the Prophet ﷺ made it to force that togetherness. The racism, what it might be between anybody is crushed. So you guys are going to be living as brothers. It doesn't matter if you don't know that person, right? They're your brother in Islam, your sister in Islam, right? You're going to take them in, which is an amazing thing to do if you think about today. Some people come to the masjid, they see someone from a different culture, they don't even give them salams, right? They kind of sit by themselves and everyone speaks in their own language and yada, yada, yada. But here the Prophet is trying to defeat this. If you're going to build a city, you're going to build a first nation, you got to make sure everyone is on the same page. And sometimes you have to do it by force. You know what? You guys are going to live in the same house and eat their food to the point that you're going to love each other. And that's what the Prophet did. You might actually need that a little bit more these days, if you will. Okay. And this is people that migrated, right? And we have this, we're here in California. We know there's a big issue about migration from down south, from people from the Latino countries, whether Mexico, Guatemala, El Salvador, etc. And we know this is a big issue. Do we let them in? Do we not let them in? Brother Johan's right from Germany. There's a lot of people came from Syria and Arabs from different areas of the wars. Germany took in a lot of immigrants in. Some people didn't like that policy. Greece took a lot in. We had Libya had an issue and so forth. So there's something that's taking people in, other human beings. Some people close the door. We have some other countries that close the door. Other Muslim countries close the door on other Muslims, which is, you might say that doesn't make any sense. And how does that work? And how do we understand that? Sometimes people look at money and then look at hearts, And so here that this is something that the Prophet is taken in. And we're talking about people who are migrating here to America. Yes, there's a lot of politics involved. How do you take care of them? Healthcare, Social Security, blah, blah, blah. And I'm not the expert on that, right? But people are looking for desperation. They're not coming from the South necessarily because, they're getting persecuted because of their religion. But, life's is so much different in terms of place to look for opportunities. So how do you understand that, right? Here, the Prophet, obviously, they're all one religion. They're all trying to put together. He incorporates them in, lets them live together, right? You mentioned that the numbers were around 90 or increasing, which is not a terrible big amount of people, right? But still, that's a lot of people, families. Where do they live? How are they going to make their money, etc. The Ansar have been living there. They're much wealthy. Sees discord was deeply in their history and their minds. That there are two tribes. Remember, they're Aus and Khazraj. That's Ansar, and they were enemies before that. Okay, I know I'm trying to think of a good example of how that would be, what country we could talk about right now, right? But but now they're one. Now they're just Muslim. But you think they're going to still have problems from the baggage of that they're going to carry? That, hey, you remember you killed my cousin last year in that war? We're both Muslim now, right? They don't forget that. So they're going to think about that, and you're going to see how that becomes issues later on. Even though they're still Muslim, that they remember, hey, I remember this, I remember that. Sometimes we see that sometimes in the masjid, we're all Muslim, but someone's from another country and they remember they had a war with another country, so like 50 years ago. And it's, and that becomes a politics, and people bring that up here. And the youth might not understand that, but then that becomes a card of why this masjid is not talking to that person not talking to that person, right? But here is that, we're so Muslim, we forget what happens there. That's something, and you ask Allah to forgive us, and you move forward, right? So that's something that the Prophet has to deal with. That's a lot of human issues. That's a big HR thing to deal with, right? How do you deal with people there? And then you have the hypocrites, munafiqun. So if you don't think this was a bigger task of how to have everyone love each other, you have the people who are just have envy and animosity to the Prophet, right? Who are you now to come in our city, and now you're the next leader? I was going to be the next leader. I've been waiting in my line for so long, right? This person that passed away, this person, I was going to be the next CEO, the next manager, the next supervisor, and now I'm not getting my promotion because now you came in there. So guess what? I don't want to work with you, and I want to make that money, and now you're taking away my salary, right? You're taking away my pride, you're taking away my prestige. So the hypocrites, a lot of them said, you know what? We could disguise ourselves as Muslims so they don't know us, and we'll say, yeah, we'll listen to the Prophet, etc. But we're going to try to work with the Quraysh and anyone else that doesn't like the Prophet and the Muslims, and try to bring them down. Okay, and that, if I would ask some of you here, do we still have this issue today? Yes, we definitely have it, right? So we have people that are Muslim by name. They might be the leaders of Muslim countries too, but then they might want more for the downfall of the religion itself. They could care less about it, as long as their country flag still flies and they get their palace and their car and their families well taken care of, right? This is the problem here. So some of the polytheists of Medina didn't embrace Islam, but at the same time, they didn't harbor faith of the Muslims. But then some other people did. Abdullah ibn Ubay is the leader of the hypocrites, and munafiqun. Allah has a whole chapter in the Quran called Surah Munafiqun, right? Talks about them and what they did, all right? And he wanted to become the next president after the war of Bu'ath, but that didn't come because of the Prophet ﷺ. So he's not so happy about that, okay? Then you have the Jewish tribes that are there. So this is another factor that the Prophet ﷺ has to deal with, okay? So imagine the Prophet ﷺ, if you want to just look at him as in a human aspect, that it was a person that was a religious movement, okay, in Mecca, and people were buying his message. Some people didn't, etc. He had to deal with persecution. Now he's in a level of like governance, right? And you can say how much experience does the Prophet have about running a land and about politics and how to take care of people, right? This is something he has to learn on the fly. Of course, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives him that guidance. And now he has to deal with like political views. How do you deal with the people, the Jewish tribes that are around you now, right? And so the Jewish tribe, we all know that they're still waiting for their Messiah, their next prophet to come, which is the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. But they didn't like him because he's Arab, right? He's not from Hebrew descent. And so they don't like the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam at all, okay? And they were there in Medina because they have from their books and their signs and their scholars that the next prophet will come from this area there. And so that's who they're waiting for. Prophet came and they didn't like him. Okay. And even narrations that they'll say that, he is our next prophet, but we're not going to accept him, right? Because they knew that from the signs. They knew that he was a prophet, but they didn't want to accept him, as they didn't accept Jesus, peace be upon him, etc. Okay? So they look down on the Arabs of being illiterate, backwards, right? Gentiles, you know what I mean? They're not the ones that have been chosen, right? They were not especially religious per se. Still kind of find that today, that, you know, maybe it's a generalization that a lot of Jews are not really religious, but more political in nature, or just spiritual at all. You know, they are from that, they still have that religious title of being Jewish, but specialize in the art of earning money, which controls the market. So they control the markets in Medina. They run the souk. They had the financial power. They had the date fields, the date palm groves that they mainly ran and owned, and so they had a lot of money from that was coming in. So they had a good financial power. Now the Prophet said how they have to deal with that. You'll see the Prophet, what he does, he makes his own market for the Muslims. Okay, I'm going to see how that causes the issue later on in a bit. But he makes his own market, that he has his own market that they could buy and sell, and don't have to rely on the Jewish market there. Right? There's a little conversation that's been going on. The Muslims should have their own currency. We'll just use it ourselves. It might be a little bit far-fetched. Not cryptocurrency, but I mean just its own currency. And there's movements, that people have. There's one scholar, he's in Malaysia actually, and he has this whole thing that Muslims have to go back to the gold dinar and the gold coin, because fiat currency, I think we all know a dollar that you have in your pocket right now, there's no backing to it other than there's no more gold standard anymore. And so all of it is just about, demand and supply. That people respect the dollar, that's why it goes up and down, etc. But anyhow, but the Prophet made his own market, right? And so they were able to, and they had their coins and stuff and so forth that they had, and they were able to trade and financially be independent of other markets that are out there. You don't want to be controlled by something else, and your economy can only go up by other people, controlling you. So the Prophet has, that's a whole other thing to understand the financial aspects of the Prophet, how he dealt with that, even as a prophet, and something we could learn from too itself. And I think that's all I had here. Oh, one more slide. So there were three main tribes in Medina, Jewish tribes. There are smaller other tribes there. The main three ones are Banu Qaynuqa, that had alliance with the Khazraj tribe, Banu Nadir, and Banu Qurayza. Different ways you want to spell it in English. So these are the three main ones that were around Medina. Okay, you would see that all of them will have problems with the Prophet ﷺ. And you'll see that all of them will be eradicated from Medina one by one because of their own jealousy and plotting against the Prophet ﷺ and trying to kill him and a bunch of other stuff that goes on, treachery and treason, if you will. And so the Prophet has to deal with living in Medina, but knowing that around the corner in the neighborhoods are people that want to kill you. Okay, so imagine how to live that life. You're just new to the city, and you have this whole issue with all the stuff that I mentioned here before. The Sahaba making sure they are okay, because sometimes the Prophet hears a story that there's someone from Khazraj and Aus, Ansar, but they're fighting with each other. So the Prophet has to go and run and say, "What are you guys doing? You guys are Muslim now. Stop fighting. Stop thinking about the old days. Not Pakistani, Indian in India anymore. You're just Muslim, right? It's just, there's no more Bangladesh and Pakistan. It's just, you're just Muslim now anymore." I'm like, oh, what happened to that war back in the 70s? I'm like, okay, right? That's true. I mean, people died in some of these things, and it's sad. But anyhow, so the Prophet had to deal with that same kind of baggage with people. So all this, and then the tribes of the Quraysh, the tribes of the Jewish tribes around him, and how to deal with that. That's a boatload, to deal with when you're now in a new city, and now you have to build a masjid. You have to teach people Islam, right? You have poor and needy that need wealth, right? How do you deal with that? And then you have the Quraysh that want to come and attack you because you just left their city. So how do you deal with all that different things? And that's what made the Prophet just amazing. Forget about character, that he smiled all the time and he cared, and he would talk to even the kids on the street. Put that aside, and that's amazing characteristics. But just being able to handle all these things gives us a whole different appreciation for the Prophet ﷺ, all what he did in terms of governance and a political figure, if you will. Abdullah ibn Salam, one of the rabbis of this truth, one of the most learned rabbis from these tribes here, embraces Islam as soon as he met the Prophet. He knew it when he saw the Prophet that this is a true prophet. This was the one that's been spoken about in our books. The details and the description of him is what's in our books. And so he took on that message and said, you know what? I embrace it. All the rest of the Jews, majority of them, there are very few amount of Jews that actually became Muslim, but they just didn't want to accept it at all because of not being Hebrew, not being this and not being that, right? And so we don't want to make the fault of the error of the previous generations of the Jews by judging people on their ethnicity. But if they're Muslim, alhamdulillah, they're good character, then we accept them. You know what I mean? And that's what we really should be looking for. And that's a big lesson, especially in marriage, especially with our young ones that want to marry outside their culture, at least what their parents understand what their culture is. If you ask them, they say, I'm American. I eat hot dogs and hamburgers. That's what we do, right? But their parents like, no, you're Pakistani. No, you're Egyptian. Like, oh, well, I never lived one day in Egypt. You know what I mean? All due respect, we love Egypt, we love Pakistan. But, Mom, I want to marry someone from a good girl, but she's from this culture or that one. But she's a Muslim, she's good, mashallah. But we see a lot of issues with that. And it causes a big issue with youth trying to get married these days. And just finding someone in general is so hard. So if they finally find somebody and then the parents stop them, then you're making it super hard for our young ones, you know what I mean? So it's something to think about. Being a parent is tough, may Allah bless our parents and may guide them, inshallah. I think, last couple of things. I keep on thinking of the last slide. So the Prophet ﷺ in his diplomacy, the best thing to do when you have an enemy that's close by there, try to write a contract as quick as possible with them. Hey guys, we're new, here it is. Let's sit down at a table, let's come up with some guidelines, okay? Before we don't know what is the rules, who's leading, who's not leading. And so he came up with this pact with the Jews. It's quite, has a lot of numbers of lines he put here. Number one, he said, the Jews of Bani Auf are one community with the believers. So saying that we're one, okay? Even though you guys are different faith, the Prophet dealt with them. You understand the people of the book, nonetheless, right? And the Jews will profess their religion. They don't have to convert. You don't have to leave your religion, right? This is Islam. I think me and you, all of this know that. The media might not know these points very well, okay? The Jews shall be responsible for their expenditure and the Muslims for theirs. So anytime financial burdens on them, they'll handle it. It doesn't fall over to the Muslims. Muslims, if attacked by a third party, so someone comes out and attacks Medina, right? Each shall come to the senses of the other. Makes sense, right? We're all living in one city. Someone attacks us, and everyone should go and try to fight against that, or at least to protect our city. Each party shall hold counsel with the other, so work together. What's going on? Mutual relations shall be found in righteousness. Sin is totally excluded. Neither shall commit sin or prejudice of the other. Either write down on paper, in other words, how to profess that. Wrong parties shall be aided. The Jews shall contribute to the cost of war as long as they are fighting along with believers. So there's financial responsibility in terms of protecting the city. Medina shall remain sacred and valuable for the join of all that join this treaty. So we don't invalidate the points there. Should any disagreement arise between the signatories of this treaty, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and his messenger shall settle the dispute. So that's a big point there. Okay, and the Jews agreed to it, that whatever happens, that the Prophet ﷺ will say to have the final word, and we will agree to it. Okay, you might say, why would the Jews even assign that? Why would they agree to that for? Right. The thing is, they understood that this is, that he was still the leader of Medina, and they had this, negotiations and this, treaties, and so they agreed to it. They understand that the Jews knew that they didn't own Medina. They didn't have that type of governance, so something they agreed to there. The signatories of the treaty shall boycott the Quraysh commercially. So look at the Prophet ﷺ, he's doing a financial boycott against the Quraysh, which is something Islamic to do. Obviously, they're the ones that are raging war against the Muslims and trying to kill him. So he puts that there. They shall all abstain from extending any support to them. We're going to see how and the Prophet was very wise. He knew that putting this there was probably the Jews are probably going to invalidate this, and violate this next day, which gives a nice grounds to kick them out and, have them,
That's the toughest one, the meat for them, bro.
Yeah, and they put it, they put that down, right? Each shall contribute to the defending of Medina in case of foreign attack in respective areas. I kind of went over that already. This treaty shall not hinder any party from seeking lawful revenge. Okay, so these are the points that the Prophet put out there. See, the Jews, they live a little bit outside the outskirts of Medina. They might, if you ask them, do you live in Medina? They might say yes or no, but they had forts. Back in those days, you saw like those old movies where you have like that wall of the city, right? So they had their own like wall around them and they lived in there. Okay, that's where they lived. They all lived together. And if you want to come into their city, then you come through that big wall that's around, like almost like a fort, okay? So Banu Qurayza, Banu Nadir, they all had these forts, if you will, like circling around them. Medina wasn't like that. I mean, the Medina still had like a wall, and all cities had walls and so forth, right? But so they were outside on their own. They weren't in the main area of Medina itself, okay? So that's why when we talk about were they part of Medina, were not a part of Medina, kind of, how do you necessarily judge that? So they had their own kind of governance and they had their own forts, and that's kind of they lived in, if you will. We're going to see that later on when the Muslims have to siege their forts and what's going to happen there. So I believe that, yeah, there you go, that's it. And so these are important to understand this, how the Prophet, that's fair, there's agreements. Nothing wrong with writing a treaty with disbelievers or anybody, as long as it's on righteousness and goodness, and Muslims should abide by that and seek that, inshallah. Questions or comments before we? Well, it's okay.
Sorry, I'm late. But as a lawyer, I must say I love his drafting techniques. Because even now we have some contracts and we oust the court and we have mediation clause and we say we will not go to court and mediated by X, Y, and Z. So I am baffled by that. So many things, subhanAllah, at that time.
Very good. That's a
beautiful drafting.
Yeah, mashallah.
Very.
That's an excellent point.
Fantastic competition and a lawyer.
Yes. Yeah, that's a good point there. But that we see today, because things are not clear, gets caught in court systems, and a bunch of money goes on, a bunch of litigation and attribution, has to go back and forth, and it's a big mess. But no one knows who was the war. It wasn't clear. So you got to have really, really clear points to make understand who would make that final decision. I think that point was great. I know we boycott the Quraysh. They understood that. That was very clear. And then if you don't violate it, then you violate it, then that's it. Then it's very clear. No one can say that, they're attacking us. No, it's treaty. It's treason. You went against what you did. It's very clear. No one should say that we are being biased against us. And we see the Prophet, we'll get to later on, he gives them so much respite, even though they break these clauses, decides doesn't be very lenient on them, which some people argue if that was right or wrong, because, they end up kind of attacking the Muslims later on. So anyhow, good point there. Any other questions or comments on the line there? All righty, inshallah. We have one more session next Sunday, and then I believe I'm gone for 2 weeks. Unfortunately, I'll be out of the country, and then we'll start off after that. Summertime, this vacation thing happens, and so I apologize for the stopping and going with the class. So we have one more, inshallah ta'ala, and we'll take a 2-week break after that. At the end, we'll make dua. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, ya Rahim, anta salam, wa minka salam, tabaraka ya dhul jalali wal ikram. Allahumma ighfir lana warhamna wa'afina wa'fu anna. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, forgiveness and send your mercy upon us, ya Rahman ya Rahim. Oh Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we ask you to send us your peace and blessing on the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam and his family and his followers, ya Rahman ya Rahim. Oh Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, accept this class from us, put on our scale of hasanat in Yawm al-Qiyamah, make it a proof for us and not a proof against us. Oh Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, instill the love of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam in our hearts. Help us follow his footsteps, Ya Kareem, Ya Rahman, Ya Rahim. Subhana rabbika rabbil izzati amma yasifun, wa salamun al mursaleen, alhamdulillah. Barakallahu feekum, may Allah bless you. We'll see you next week.